Hello, my creeplings. I got a new one. Well, new to me. New-ish to me. I've seen this movie one time before. Thought I'd go back and rewatch it and share my thoughts. This one is the 1982 remake of Cat People. Now, I know I've bitched about remakes before. This is a kind of a remake idea done right. The original Cat People was released in like the 40s. So this is about a 40-year difference between the movie that came out, the original movie, and the remake coming out. Now, my big problem with remakes is a lot of times they're remakes of movies that don't really need to be remade, or especially nowadays when they're remaking. I know it's, we're getting to that point where the 80s is definitely 40 years away. The 90s is 30 years away. But things haven't changed that much when it comes to like day-to-day living. If you take a movie from the 40s and modernize it, it's different because so much has changed since then. But if you take a movie from the 80s and modernize it to today, it doesn't feel like as much has changed. So when I bitch about remakes, it's usually bitching about things like that. This one, the movies are almost night and day difference from the clips I've seen of Cat People from the 40s and the movie I just watched. Like I said, this was released in 1982, directed by Paul Schrader, screenplay by Alan Ormsby. Was released April 2nd of 1982. This is listed as a supernatural horror film. Definitely leans more on the supernatural thriller end of things. Got a really decent cast list, though. We have Natasha Kinski, who was a model turned actress, I believe, at the time. She is our main character, Irina Gallier. Her brother, Paul Gallier, is played by the one, the only Malcolm McDowell. Mr. Clockwork Orange himself. Always a treat to see him in a movie. John Hurd plays Oliver Yates. Annette O'Toole plays a character named Alice Perrin. I'm mostly familiar with her from lots of TV miniseries in the 80s and 90s and Mrs. Kent on Smallville. Going back to John Hurd, the one thing I definitely remember him from is Kevin McAllister's dad in Home Alone, but he's been in a very large amount of movies and TV shows. Very good actor. Ed Begley Jr. shows up as another one of the characters, Joe Craig, and John Larroquette makes a small appearance. And those are the main characters we really need to talk about. Okay, so we open up at an undisclosed, primitive human settlement where they have a sacrificial maiden is tied to a tree. She is approached by a Black Panther, and it sets his paws on her. And then next scene is another girl with a very feline face. Approaches a similar big cat in a cave without incurring attack. So it sets to the idea that humans have been interacting with these Black Panthers for probably millennia. We go to the present. Irina Gallier has traveled to New Orleans from Canada to meet up with her estranged brother, Paul. Their parents died when they were about 10. Irina was raised in foster care. After they were orphaned, they were separated. Paul was in and out of psych wards, but he's now involved with church. And I'm going to yawn. Please excuse me. And he lives in New Orleans with a Creole housekeeper named Famale. Now, she's played by Ruby Dee. She's a very interesting character. Okay, so she settles in. They have a little bit of reminiscing. Now, you kind of get this off feeling about Paul. He's maybe a little too familiar with someone he hasn't seen in over 10 years. A little too touchy. It's definitely enough to put your teeth on edge. So that night, we cut to a prostitute in a Fleabag motel going to meet a John, but instead of the John being there, there's a Black Panther in the room, and it mauls her. Doesn't kill her, but it mauls her. So they call in the authorities, and three of the authorities are zookeepers, curators, whatever they're calling themselves in this, from the New Orleans Zoological Gardens. That would be our Oliver Yates, Alice Perrin, and Joe Cray. They trank it and managed to get him to the zoo. Now, Irina wakes up the next morning, finds Paul missing, talks to Famale. Famale's like, oh, he went to the mission early. Go out, sightsee, do your thing. So she sightsees over the next couple days. She ends up at the zoo, and she ends up in front of the Black Panther in the enclosure. And she's like drawn to it. And she pulls out her sketchbook and starts drawing. Apparently she's there till well after close. Because Oliver finds her, chases her off, chases her. They make up for the misunderstanding. He takes her out to dinner, gets to know her a little bit, offers her a job at the zoo gift shop because she says she was looking for one. He says they've got a spot open. She meets Alice at the job. Excuse me, and there's the yawns again. Now, Alice and Oliver had a relationship. They're not together. She still seems to want to be together. So, but Alice and Irina kind of bond after work at a bar. Start talking about men. You find out Irina's still a virgin, which is kind of strange to Alice, but I believe at this point, this is where Alice starts seeing her as a rival for Oliver's attentions, and things get a little weird. Now, later on, like days later, Joe, Ed Begley Jr.'s character, is trying to clean the cage that the Black Panther is in. I don't understand their protocol, because if you had to get near and clean the actual cage, wouldn't you try to get the panther out of it so you can get in there, do a thorough cleaning, rather than trying to hose the cage down while the cat's still in there? Either way, this is what this butthead tries to do. It ends up losing his arm and dying in the process. So Oliver decides he's going to euthanize the panther. He goes back to do it, only to find it missing. There's this puddle of goo instead. So shortly after this, Paul turns back up, and he starts making advances to his sister. She freaks out, flees, passes out, flags down a police car, has second thoughts about turning her brother in, but the canine in the car goes nuts. So detectives are called in. They search the house. Paul is gone by this point, but in the basement of his house, they find shackles and remainders of bodies. They figure that Paul's a serial killer who probably fed his victims to the panther as some kind of religious ceremony, because you kind of find out Paul's become a little bit of a religious nut. They call in Oliver and Alice to investigate the panther angle of all of it. Irina, again, is rightfully freaked out by all of this. She runs away from the situation and kind of takes refuge in a frustrated romance. She kind of hooks up with Oliver, but there's no physical intimacy. They go to a little house on the river. He teaches her how to catch fish. They have a nice little romantic thing. But she's kind of starting mentally to change. There's a point where she goes to, and she's stalking a rabbit. I kind of started tuning out because the pacing on this movie is a little slow. One drawback. Paul finds Irina and visits her again. He reveals that he is the escaped panther, that they are both werecats. This is their family heritage. Mating with a human transforms them into the panther, and the only way to transform back is to kill a human being. You don't necessarily have to kill the person you slept with. So, he slept with somebody, mauled the prostitute, didn't kill her, got captured, and when he ripped off Joe's arm, that transformed him back. So that kind of gives you an idea of his timeline. He drops the bomb that their parents were siblings, because the only way that a werecat can mate and not change is with another werecat. So they're, I think the term was ancestrally incestuous, which, I don't understand it. I have never been attracted to any of my siblings or any of my relatives like that. Not my thing, and I'm just going to put it at that. Paul keeps resuming his advances. He's like, just let's accept this. Let's have a relationship. And she is having none of this shit. I am so tired today. I am so sorry, guys. But I don't have the time to refilm this, so we're going to keep going. So, Paul transforms, and I think Irina's staying in the same house as Oliver, just across the hall. Well, he transforms, tries to attack Irina, ends up attacking Oliver instead. And he's shot by Alice. So, Paul's dead. In panther form. They take the corpse to the zoo. He tries to do an autopsy. And he being Oliver. And he cuts the panther's body open and an arm flops out. So I'm assuming that's Paul's human form tucked into it's kind of weird. And then the body gasses out and goos down and it's gone. No panther, no Paul, no nothing. No evidence whatsoever. Now, as this goes on, her feline instincts are starting to emerge. She starts stalking Alice. 2 instances of this. The swimming pool instance is the last one. And you can tell she's like, I need to eliminate this potential rivalry. And it's kind of interesting. I will say there's a lot of boobs in this. And a lot of naked bodies. And I'm just going to say this. I was surprised at Annette O'Toole's body. I'm so used to her older. Girl was banging. Had nice boobies and everything. I know, embarrassing for me to say, but I'm jealous of that body. How about that? I wish I had that body. So, she and Oliver get back together. Irina and Oliver. They finally sleep together. She finally gets her cherry popped. And, of course, she transforms into the panther. And the transformation, I thought the transformation in American Werewolf was weird. This one is just, it's not as good. And it's a little weird, just odder. But it gets the point across for 1982 effects. Excuse me. So she transforms, she escapes, trapped on a bridge by police. She jumps. Oliver finally figured out what's going on. So he figures out she's headed back up to that little fishing house that they went to. Of course, she is now human because she killed the caretaker. And she basically, they have a discussion, and it boils down to, she's like, kill me. And he's like, no. And she's like, okay, fine, have sex with me and let me be where I belong, i.e. keep me in the panther form permanently because I can't do this back and forth shit. Now he reluctantly agrees, ties her up, does the deed, and we cut to them back at the zoo. Looks like Alice and Oliver have gotten back together, but it definitely feels one-sided. The panther, Irina, is at the zoo, and we get one last interaction. He can hand feed her, and then we close the movie out. Cast list being pretty good. Performances were pretty solid. This is one of those that I'll watch when I think about it occasionally, but it's not high on my list. It's definitely one of those that's in the list of better remakes. The theme song is amazing because it's done by David Bowie, so Bowie girl here. Would I recommend this to your average horror fan? Probably not. It's a bit arty. It's a bit artistic. More art house film than, your regular slasher. It's got some slow ass pacing in spots. But if you're into that kind of thing, or you want to dissect a social commentary on female sexualism, it's a movie for you. It's not high on my list, but I'll rewatch it occasionally. If anything, just to spark a conversation. So, Cat People from 1982, it's a middling movie. It's not going to be something that I recommend to everybody. You gotta be into kind of certain things to really appreciate this one. I'm sorry. My energy's like down to here today. So I'm going to just end this on that note and figure out what the next couple movies I'm going to watch are, although I'll probably do that at a later date. So in the meantime, my friends, keep watching movies. Send me some suggestions if you got any good ones. I'm going to try and do some more newer horror. I'm going to try not to play around in the 80s too much because I know I tend to really stick in there. But it had so many bangers for that decade. And tell me how you would feel about me going back to the early days of horror cinema. Like, I know last year during Christmas I threatened to do some stuff on the Universal Monsters, but, because not everybody knows about where everything, where a lot of this started, and I'd love to break some of that down. But I also realize that a lot of modern day horror fans do not have the patience for old black and white movies, and I can appreciate that. As a younger person, it really took me a minute to appreciate older cinema. I thank my grandmother for that one because she almost always had Turner Classic Movies or AMC or something like that on where it was older movies. So I still, there's only a handful that make my, top lists, but I have an appreciation for the older cinema. Plus, I'm a girl who likes the midnight movies and the horror hosts and all that. And let's face it, they showed some old black and white stinkers. And I've sat through the whole thing. So yeah, so let me know what you think about that. Again, I'll take suggestions in the comments. But yeah, broaden my horizons, y'all. But on that note, I'm going to just good night, my creeplings, and I'll see you next time. Bye.